Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. I think overall this is probably the best movie of the trilogy, just because in my opinion it just feels the most like the books, whereas Two Towers and Return of the King kind of feel more like Peter Jackson's interpretation of the books, but this one specifically feels like Tolkien. So right off the bat we get the prologue of the creation of the ring, and it gives us all the details about Sauron and the creation of the ring, and the elves and the dwarves and the men, and how they all try to create their own rings of power. And of course Sauron created the One Ring, which is the one ring to rule them all. So then the elves and the men form the last alliance, and they go against Sauron and his forces. Of course Isildur cuts off the ring of Sauron's hand and takes the ring, but then instead of destroying it at Mount Doom, he decides to keep the ring for himself, and then the ring eventually betrays him in the end. So then he dies, and the ring eventually comes to creature Gollum, who is actually another one of my favorite characters, and in this movie he kind of gets a brief little cameo, but then he gets expanded more in Two Towers and Return of the King, which we'll get to in a second. So then Gollum has the ring for 4,500 years, and eventually the ring comes to Bilbo. So then Bilbo has the ring, and then he keeps it for 60 years. And then we get to the big preparation for the party, reintroduces the character of Bilbo, and also the character of Gandalf, another one of my favorite characters, who's kind of suspicious about the ring because the whole backstory. Bilbo goes on a quest with a handful of dwarves in order to retake their homeland, and during that journey that's when he finds the ring. So Gandalf has always been kind of suspicious about the ring, and then when it gets brought up later on, he tells Bilbo, are you going to leave the ring with Frodo? But obviously Bilbo's really addicted to the ring and he doesn't really want to, but then eventually Gandalf convinces him to leave the ring behind. So he leaves the ring behind, and then we get introduced to the character of Frodo, who inherits the ring. Then obviously Gandalf tells him that the ring was made by Sauron, and that Sauron is the Dark Lord who disappeared but now is regaining power. In order to save the Shire, he actually inspires Frodo to take the ring to Rivendell, where he thinks it might be safe. So the first step is to go to the city of Bree, where Gandalf tells Frodo that he's going to meet them there. So he meets up with a couple other hobbits, Samwise Gamgee, probably one of the best characters in the trilogy, Merry and Pippin, who are kind of like these trickster hobbits who are always kind of getting into trouble. So they finally go to Bree, but then they don't see Gandalf there because he was captured by Saruman, who's the white wizard who was corrupted by Sauron. And then another threat that the hobbits are facing is that there's these things called ringwraiths, who are actually the 9 men doomed to die at the beginning of the prologue who were corrupted by the ring. So then they go after the hobbits, but then we get introduced to the character of Aragorn, aka Strider, who's actually a descendant of Isildur, but he wants nothing to do with that lineage because he knows that men failed, so he decides to just be a ranger who helps certain people to get from one place to another. So then Aragorn takes the hobbits to Weathertop. They have the confrontation with the Nazgul. Aragorn defeats him, but then one of the Nazguls stabs Frodo in the shoulder, so then they have to get him to Rivendell for help, and that's when they meet the character of Arwen, who takes them across the ford, and then she uses Elvish to summon the water to turn into these water-like horses and then wash away the Nazgul. So they get to Rivendell. Frodo's finally on the mend. He talks to Sam about, hey, we finally got the ring to Rivendell, but I kind of want to go home now. But then they go to the Council of Elrond, and Elrond is the head elf of Rivendell and the father of Arwen. So they have the Council of Elrond. They come to the decision that the ring needs to be destroyed. And then as all different characters like Boromir of Gondor, Legolas the elf, and Gimli the dwarf are arguing about who should take the ring, Bilbo finally steps up and volunteers to take the ring, and he says, I will take the ring to Mordor, though I do not know the way. And then that's when the Fellowship forms. We get Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Merry, Pippin, Sam, and of course Boromir. And they finally set up together to Mordor, and we have that epic shot of them walking up the mountain, and then we get the dun, 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 Fellowship of the Ring theme, which is awesome. So their original plan is to go to the Gap of Rohan, but then Saruman's forced their spying on them, so then they decide to go to the Path of Caradhras, which is like this snowy mountain. But then Saruman uses his spells to create an avalanche on the mountain, so then the Fellowship have no choice but to go through the Mines of Moria, which Gimli recommends. So they go through Moria, they encounter the Watcher in the Water, which brings down the gate, so they have no choice but to go through the mountain. They encounter goblins, they encounter the Balrog, and they go across the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, but then the Balrog is pursuing them, so then Gandalf sacrifices himself, and then has that epic line of, you shall not pass! Puts his staff down, the bridge breaks, Balrog falls down, but then he whips his fire whip around Gandalf's ankle. Gandalf falls off the side, holds onto the cliff and says, fly, you fools, good! And then falls off the side. So then all the characters are losing hope. They exit the mountain. They decide to go to Lothlorien to kind of regroup and figure out what they need to do next. Frodo's obviously feeling very doubtful about himself. He looks at the mirror of a character named Galadriel, who's the head elf of Lothlorien, sees that if the ring isn't destroyed, the Shire will be destroyed. So then that remotivates Frodo to continue his quest. So then the Fellowship leaves. They get gifts from the Lothlorien elves. They sail down the river. And then in the meanwhile, Saruman's growing an army of Uruk-hai, which are kind of like orc-goblin hybrids, to go after the Fellowship. So everything kind of comes to a climax in Amon Hen. There's a character named Lurtz, who's the head of the Uruk-hai. He kills Boromir, he takes the hobbits, because Saruman told him that one of the halflings had the ring, so they take Merry and Pippin. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli decide to go after them, and then Frodo and Sam are left to go on a journey alone to Mordor, and then that leads us right into the Two Towers. Frodo and Sam meet up with the character of Gollum, who I talked about earlier, and then after a confrontation they convince Gollum to take them to Mordor, because secretly Gollum has a plan to take them to the character named Shelob, who's this giant spider. Then she'd kill them, and then he would take the ring for himself, so they go off on their journey, and then meanwhile we have Merry and Pippin, who are being taken by the Uruk-hai, with Aragorn, Legolas, and and Gimli hot on their trail. Then we also get introduced to the world of Rohan. There's a character named King Theoden, who's the head of Rohan, but he's under a spell by Saruman, so then the kingdom of Rohan's kind of in ruin. Then we have his niece named Eowyn, who's trying to do everything she can to fight for the kingdom. Then we have the character of Eomer, who's Theoden's nephew, who gets banished by Theoden under a character named Grim Wormtongue's influence, who's kind of like the advisor of the king, but he's also been corrupted by Saruman. So meanwhile, we cut back to the outside of Fangorn Forest. Merry and Pippin are able to escape because Eomer and his forces wipe out those orcs. They escape into Fangorn Forest and meet up with the character of Treebeard, who's this giant walking, talking tree. And then we cut to Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli go into Fangorn Forest, and they meet up with Gandalf, who's been resurrected after his fight with the Balrog, so now he's Gandalf the White. Then he tells them about the war that's about to be happening, with Saruman creating more Uruk-hai to go after all the people of Rohan and wipe them out. So when they go to Rohan, they free Theoden from his spell, they banish Wormtongue, and they convince the king to leave the city of Edoras and go to a stronghold called Helm's Deep. So they finally start their journey to Helm's Deep. They get attacked by wargs sent by Saruman. Aragorn goes off the cliff, and he's presumed dead, but he's actually alive and gets saved by his horse named Brago, who was given to him by Eomer early on. He sees Yarmy, goes to Helm's Deep, warns Theoden, and then they get ready for war. And then finally we get the huge battle of Helm's Deep, which is epic and amazing. That's another thing about the Two Towers. I think it's probably my favorite out of the trilogy. I know it's probably not the most accurate to the book, but I think just because it just has so many action moments, Battle of Helm's Deep alone is definitely one of the highlights. And then as the battle goes on, the Uruk-hai get the upper hand, and then all hope seems lost, and our heroes have to retreat into the upper part of the fortress. And then meanwhile, we cut to Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, who are making their way to Mordor. And then as this story goes on, Frodo is also slowly but surely getting corrupted by the ring. But then halfway through, they get captured by the character of Faramir, who's actually the brother of Boromir. And Faramir is also kind of getting corrupted by the ring as well, so he decides to take him to the city of Osgiliath so he can prove himself to his father Denethor, who we'll get to in Return of the King. That's kind of one of the scenes I missed from the extended version that's not in the theatrical, is this whole flashback scene of the relationship between Boromir, Faramir, and Denethor. How Denethor favors Boromir because he's the firstborn, and then Faramir is kind of like a failure in his eyes. But we'll get to more of their relationship in Return of the King. They go to Osgiliath, then all hope seems lost. It's kind of like this war-torn area that's outside of Minas Tirith, which will get expanded to more in Return of the King. And it's actually being attacked by Sauron's forces. And then when all hope seems lost, a Nazgul actually swoops in and goes after Frodo. He goes up to one of the high points of Osgiliath and actually offers the ring to the Nazgul. But then Sam, being the hero that he is, charges up the stairs, grabs Frodo and pulls him off the side, and they roll down the stairs. And then Frodo nearly kills Sam, but then Sam's like, "But you're Sam. Don't you know you're Sam?" And then Frodo kind of comes back to normal, and then feels all hopeless, and then Sam gives that awesome speech at the end. And then we kind of cut to these other different moments in the storylines of Aragorn seeing the light inside Helm's Deep, and then knowing that Gandalf will return, because earlier he went off to go find Eomer and his forces in order to be reinforcements for Rohan. So they charge out of Helm's Deep. We have that epic moment of "For Thelingas!" from Theoden. We have the epic music of them going down the causeway, and we get the music, which is epic. And they look up the hill, they see the light, they see Gandalf and Eomer and his forces charging down the hill, taking on the Uruk-hai, and then all the Uruk-hai retreat. And we cut to Merry and Pippin convincing Treebeard and the Ents to fight Saruman and his forces. They go to Isengard, see that everything's been destroyed. Obviously, Treebeard's upset. He gets all the other Ents, and they have their last march of the Ents on Isengard. They break the dam, the water comes in and floods Isengard, so all of this industry that Saruman has is destroyed. Another theme that Tolkien brought in his books is how all this nature is being destroyed by industry, so I'm glad that Peter Jackson kept that in the movies. Then we cut back to Osgiliath. Faramir sees just how corrupt this ring can be and how dangerous it can be, so he decides to let the hobbits go, and they're free to go off to continue their journey to Mordor. But in the meantime, Gollum is still scheming to take the hobbits to her to kill him off and then take the ring for himself. Then we have that awesome pan-up shot from the forest of Ithilien all the way up the stairs of Cirith Ungol, all the way up to the peak of Mordor, and we see Mount Doom and Sauron in the background. And we know that they're getting closer and closer to achieving their goal. And that leads us right into Return of the King. I think overall this is probably the most satisfying of the trilogy, for obvious reasons. This is the great ending that we're trying to lead up to. So we pick up where we left off. Part of the Fellowship's reunited. Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and Gandalf meet up with Merry and Pippin, who are in Isengard. And that's another thing that we kind of missed from the theatrical version, is kind of like the closure from the whole Isengard flooding sequence, where in the extended version, we see the deaths of Saruman and Wormtongue. And that's actually a callback to the end of the book, The Scouring the Shire, where Saruman actually dies there. But in the movie, they put it up to the front just to give a resolution to that whole storyline with Saruman. But in that scene, Pippin finds a Palantir, and the Palantir is a seeing stone, which is a way that Saruman is able to communicate with Sauron and kind of see different places within Middle-earth with this device. So then Pippin takes it, but then obviously Gandalf says, "Folovatuk," and takes it from him. They go back to Edoras, and they kind of like unwind and celebrate the victory of Helm's Deep. And then later that night, Pippin actually steals a Palantir from Gandalf and looks into it, and then sees Sauron's eye, and then sees his plan. Gandalf's like, "What's going on?" And then Pippin says that he saw a white tree, and then Gandalf Gandalf deduces that that was actually from Minas Tirith, and that Sauron actually plans to strike the city of Minas Tirith. So then Gandalf and Pippin go to Minas Tirith. They meet up with Denethor. They try to warn him about this oncoming threat that Sauron has with his army. But then Denethor, being Denethor, he's super depressed of the fact that Boromir was slain down, who was his favorite son, who I was talking about earlier. So he's obviously kind of useless. So Gandalf and Pippin have to try to find a way to convince Theoden's army to come for reinforcements in order to help in this grand battle. So then Pippin lights the beacons. It gets a signal to Rohan, and then Aragorn sees it. He bursts into the doors of Theoden's palace and then says, "The beacons are Minas Tirith! Beacons are lit! Gandalf calls for aid." And we get that epic shot of Theoden kind of contemplating, saying, "And Rohan will answer. Muster the Rohirrim." So then the Rohirrim are on their way to Minas Tirith for the reinforcements. But as they're kind of in their camp, they realize that they're probably not going to be enough to destroy Sauron's army. So then Elrond actually goes into the camp and meets up with Aragorn and tells him that he has to go to the Pass of the Dead in order to meet with the King of the Dead and convinces him to join in the battle against Sauron's forces. So then he presents him with the Sword of Anduil, which is actually the sword that Isildur used to cut the ring from Sauron's hand. So now it's been finally reforged, and then Aragorn can use it in order to convince the King of the Dead to join their army. So then Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli go to the Paths of the Dead. They meet with King of the Dead, and then the theatrical kind of cuts there because you don't get the answer, which is fine. It kind of gives more suspense of like, are the heroes going to be able to convince the King of the Dead to fight in this army or not? I don't know. We'll have to find out. But then in the extended version, after the whole earthquake scene and then Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli escape, they see the Corsair ships, which are like kind of like these pirate ships that were recruited by Sauron in the distance, seeing them on their way to Minas Tirith, and then the King of the Dead says, "We fight." So we finally cut to Minas Tirith. We get the whole battle, the siege of Gondor. All hope seems lost. Gandalf and Pippin have their backs to the wall, like, oh no, what are we gonna do? And then finally we get the we see in the distance Theoden, and we also have Merry and Éowyn join the battle, in disguise, and the Riders of Rohan charging up the brow. And we have this whole epic battle of Pelennor Field, which is amazing, and then when you think that the heroes have it all together, we finally get the Mumakil, which are these giant elephant things stomping on all the horses and, swinging their tusks with spikes on them to kill them all. So we get those epic shots, and then it's just like, oh no, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? And then finally we get the Corsair ships. You think like, oh no, Sauron's forces are mustering. All hope is lost for the heroes. But then we get Aragorn jumping off the side along with Legolas and Gimli, and then the orcs are kind of looking at him like, yeah, okay, we can take them. And then Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli charge. They get the army of the dead behind them. They charge into Pelennor Fields. More epicness. Legolas has his epic moment with the Mumakil, slaying him down. They have their counting of how many orcs that they kill down. Finally, the battle is won. Everything's all good. Then meanwhile, we cut to Frodo, Sam, and Gollum going up the stairs of Curathungel. Then Gollum has his plan to get rid of Sam by making Frodo think that Sam's been stealing all the food. So then Frodo sends Sam home. They continue to go to Shelob's lair. Frodo's by himself, where actually in the book it was Frodo and Sam who go together, but Peter wanted to have more suspense with that, so he decided to have Frodo go alone. Frodo goes in, has a confrontation with Shelob, gets away, but then Shelob stabs him. He's stunned, gets wrapped up in the spiderweb, and then Sam comes in with Sting that Frodo lost earlier in the cave, and then he has this like, "Let him go, you filth! Let him go! You will not touch him again. Come on and finish it." And has his fight with Shelob, defeats Shelob, is about to save Frodo, but then orcs come in, take Frodo away. Sam goes after them, has more epic moments of like, that's for Frodo, that's for the Shire, that's for my old gaffer. Meets up with Frodo. Frodo realizes, oh no, they took the ring. But then Sam has the ring, gives it back to Frodo. They continue on to Mordor in disguise. And then again, in the extended version, they have a whole confrontation with the orcs as they're actually going towards the Black Gates, because Aragorn has this whole plan, which is also in the extended version, but not in the theatrical version, where he tries to distract Sauron. And so that Sauron strikes too soon, goes to the Black Gates, and has this whole battle outside there, so that Sam and Frodo are able to go to Mordor. So then they continue to go to Mordor. They finally get to Mount Doom. They go inside, and then meanwhile we have the whole battle outside the Black Gates. So we kind of have these two storylines going on. Frodo's about to destroy the ring, but then he gets corrupted by it, and then puts on the ring, turns invisible. Sam's all like, no! And then Gollum, who's been following him the whole time, pounces on top of Frodo, bites his finger off, takes the ring, holds it up, and he's like, precious, precious. And then in the book, he actually just, falls off the side and dies. But then Peter wanted to have more tension with that scene, so he decides to have Frodo have a fight with Gollum. So they're arguing with the ring, they're pulling it left and right, which is actually a callback to the opening of the film where Smeagol and Deagle, Smeagol's cousin, are fighting over the ring, and then Smeagol actually kills Deagle. But in this one, they both fall off the side. Gollum falls off the side, goes into the lava, he disappears in the the Rings just sitting there. Frodo's on the side of the cliff. He's about to kill himself because he just wants to end it all. But then we have that epic line from Sam, like, "Don't you let go of reach." Frodo puts out his hand. Sam takes it. He pulls him up. The ring gets destroyed. Sauron's like, "Ah!" You know, he's a giant flaming eyeball. He's screaming. Barad-dûr gets destroyed. The Black Gates of Mordor gets destroyed. Mount Doom blows up in an epic explosion. And the heroes are kind of looking at it the whole time. They're happy that the ring's destroyed, but then they realize, oh wait, Frodo was still in there. He's probably dead. And then Frodo and Sam run out just in time. They jump off into like a little cliffside surrounded by lava. All hope seems lost. The movie could end there. Frodo talks about how he can see the Shire again. And then Sam talks about how he wanted to see Rosie Cotton again. Frodo puts his arm around him. He's like, "I'm glad to be with you, Sam. Here at the end of all things." Fades to black. You think the movie's going to end there, but then we get all of our endings. And I know a lot of people hate all the different multiple endings and everything like that, but I mean, I don't mind them. I think if you watch the trilogy in one run, it really just seems like it's just wrapping up all these different storylines. So then you have the Eagles coming in, saving Frodo and Sam, them waking up in Minas Tirith, reuniting with the other members of the Fellowship. We get the whole coronation scene of Aragorn finally becoming king. He meets with Arwen, his long lost love, and then we get the whole emotional scene of Aragorn saying, "You bow to no man," and all the characters bowing down to the hobbits. And then we cut to the hobbits returning to the Shire, and then life has just gone on without them. You know, everyone's kind of looking at them like, "Oh, who are those little weird guys over there?" But then obviously that was Tolkien's way of showing that innocent soldiers going off to war and then coming back and not being the same. And then Sam looks and sees Rosie Cotton, gets married, and then Frodo's like writing his book, a continuation from There and Back Again, and then The Lord of the Rings by Frodo Baggins, little meta reference right there. Then obviously Frodo's still being affected by the ring. He doesn't feel like he can go on living. So then him, Bilbo, Gandalf, and the elves go to the Grey Havens, which is like the Undying Lands, kind of like away from Middle-Earth in order to live peacefully. And they sail off, and get another emotional scene of Frodo saying goodbye to all the other hobbits, and then Frodo giving the book to Sam to say that his story will go on. Cut to the very end, Sam returning home with Rosie Cotton, and then seeing his two little kids, and then we get the last line that was actually in the book of Sam going like, "Well, I'm back." Them going inside their hobbit hole, closing the door, and then that's the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'm not crying. You're crying. So obviously you can see that the Lord of the Rings trilogy is definitely one of my favorite trilogies of all time. They're pretty much like three perfect movies in my opinion, no matter what people say, like, "Oh, it's just people walking." It's like, no, it's actually more than that. It's actually an emotional story about good versus evil and how evil can corrupt good people, and that how good people can overcome this evil by working together in a fellowship, and good ultimately always wins. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. But yeah, thanks so much for watching, and be sure to give this video a like and subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you next time. My precious.